Hello. Right now, one of two things are about to happen. I'm either going to read you a bedtime story with Sean Arthur Cox, or this cat is going to interrupt everything. We'll see which one is which, but for now, it is definitely BS with S.A.C and a cat. When last we left off, William had found himself in a cemetery, surrounded by up a tree, surrounded by wolves and skeletons, and now he is back at the camp where Ollivander has been enjoying a hearty fire and a meal. Chapter 7 Tight Spaces. William found it difficult to keep the embers of his anger burning while enjoying such a delicious and well-deserved meal, but that didn't keep him from trying. Heat radiated from his face, hot as the massive turkey leg, plump and juicy, that he stuffed said face with. Smoke poured from his ears, just as it most certainly had poured over this heavenly bird, seasoning the beast with a nice, oaky flavor that conjured flames to mind without bringing the taste of charred coals and ashes along with it. His blood boiled like potatoes, his pride tender like the meat, and even though nothing in his foul mood reminded him of it, he couldn't shake his thoughts from the lingering sweetness of his slow-roasted corn. He grunted a sound of reluctant enjoyment and set his indignation aside. Between the refreshing bath in the river nearby and the savory succulence of this heavenly meal, he had no time for resentment. He could always pick it up after dinner and before sleep. "I see you found a sword," Ollivander proffered, trying to stir something out of the boy that actually sounded like words. William grunted out a wet noise of disapproval. There was equal parts disinterest and half-chewed turkey. "What is it, a claymore?" William scowled, as if Ollivander didn't know a scimitar when he saw one. William could see through the veteran's cheap veil to his true devious intentions. Conversation. He had no desire to dignify the old man with a response. "Looks kind of rubbish to me," he shrugged. "But you know what they say about beggars and choosers." William's glare narrowed. "I'm just saying, when we get to Collick's Landing, you might want to get something nicer, stronger, maybe a bone dagger. Anything's better than that claymore." "It's a scimitar," William barked. "You know it's a scimitar, and for your information, it's one of the most well-crafted swords I've ever had the privilege of holding. It has a perfect curve for slashes and chops. The hilt is in excellent shape." He held out his left hand and lay the blade across his index finger, where it sat level and motionless. His eyes met Ollivander's with a surety and confidence the old barkeep had never seen in the boy before. "Perfect balance," William said defiantly. "And who knows what sort of abuse this thing has taken, for who knows how long. It's still balanced and still as strong as the day it was forged. Just a little dirty and dull is all." William sighed and beheld the blade resting precariously on his fingers. In one slow, gentle motion, he returned the scimitar to his belt. Just because it isn't enchanted or the stuff of legends doesn't mean it's worthless. The scimitar is worth saving, he thought to himself. Barrow's End is worth saving. His gaze drifted over the fire, its deep orange wisps drawing his thoughts deeper within himself. His anger lulled beneath the mesmeric popping of wood and the soft dance of dull flame licking at the dark sky. After a moment that stretched wide across the evening, he tossed in a twig and let out a half-hearted laugh. "Besides, if I hit you with it, the dirt on the blade will infect the wound, even if the edge doesn't kill you outright, so that has to count for something, right?" He broke the hypnotic hold the flickering flames held over him and looked up to Ollivander. His mouth curled in a wry smile. He joked, but the hero of old could see a vacancy and hollowness behind the wide eyes and pleasant expression. "Yeah," Ollivander replied, his voice low and fatherly. "That counts for something." The two travelers ate in silence for several moments, each taking in everything and nothing at once. The chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, the distant lapping of water to the west and wolves to the east. The soft crackling, popping noises of dry oak burning, turning to chars and ashes. "Do you think we'll pull it off?" William asked, breaking the impromptu meditation. "The kobolds?" Ollivander asked. "Everything," William replied. "There are so many of them. I nearly killed myself facing one skeleton, a few oversized hounds. But a few thousand little guys with swords? How do you even face something like that?" "One at a time, I suppose." "With no training, and a busted ankle? I don't even know how we'll make it in time." "We'll make it," Ollivander replied. His voice didn't bear any form of bold conviction the way William imagined encouraging speeches would. It didn't feel like a fearless leader urging his frightened soldiers on to greatness and glory. His words were not an expression of determined certainty. They were not meant to reassure or to inspire faith. The power instead lay within the simplicity of the words, quiet and unmoving, like a mountain, not magnificent for any deed, but awe-inspiring by sheer presence. His words stated simple fact, the way a person might describe the weather, or perhaps the color of a leaf. The sky was blue, the sun would rise, grass would grow. Like the movements of the stars, one didn't need conviction that they would nightly take their path across the heavens. There existed no other possibility. They would make it to Barrow's End in time to save the village. "What do we do about my ankle, then?" William asked, more out of curiosity than contrariety. "It's not broken, just twisted. Your splint, unorthodox though it may be, is holding." Ollivander considered. "Only the gods know why. Even so, at least we have that going for us. It'll still hurt to walk on for several days, though." And here I thought my luck was turning around, William prodded his wounded leg and winced. "Sort of." "That's the business for you," the barkeep replied. "It always gets worse before it gets better." "How much worse?" "A whole lot worse." "Wonderful." Ollivander nodded and rose to his feet with a groan. He opened up his pack and slid out the scrying mirror, holding its gilded frame carefully in his stone-sized hands. Then, with movements more befitting a man his age than a man of his stature, he sauntered his old bones toward the bushes. "Where are you going?" William asked, barely lifting his eyes. "Gonna go talk to the wife," he said. "Get some sleep. It's gonna be a long day tomorrow." "Don't suppose she can put my clothes in that magic footlocker tonight, can she?" "Put 'em in the twin bag," Ollivander muttered, weariness hiding in his deep, resonant voice. "I'll see what I can do." William grabbed the magic pack and opened it wide, pulling his scimitar from his belt. "Want me to see if the trunk can do anything for rusty old swords?" William eyed the blade for a moment, taking in its curves, its grip, and feeling the feeling of its weight in his hand. "No thanks," he said, soft and reverent. "I think I'd like to fix this one myself, if it's all the same." "I understand," the barkeep replied. A warm smile spread from his lips to his eyes. Ollivander disappeared into the shadows as William stripped from the grimy, shredded cloth that once had been his clothes. He did his best to beat the caked-in dirt off of them before slipping them into the twin bag and fastened it tightly behind him. Then he pulled his bedroll from the bottomless bag, replaced it with his scimitar and crutch, and slid his tired frame, wounded leg first, into the sleeping bag. The bag carried no enchantments, but it might as well have. Its downy walls enveloped William in the soft, relaxing warmth, teasing the aches and pains from the poor boy's throbbing muscles. He couldn't say whether the bedding owed its miraculous recuperative powers to its craftsmanship or his own overpowering exhaustion, but neither concerned him. His rest was blissful. As he closed his eyes, he could almost hear the magic sleep fairies coming through the woods, laughing and joking to take him off to the land of dreams. His dizzy head amused itself with the rowdy depth that their little pixie voices possessed. William shot up and snapped his head left to right like a squirrel whose traipsing had just been interrupted by the snapping of twigs. There were voices approaching, loud, violent-sounding voices from the west, accompanied by the stomping of boots and crackling of branches. William felt fairly confident about who would be walking up on their camp in the middle of the night. Bandits. The boy practically threw himself from his bedding and dove for the bottomless bag. Throwing open the top, he thrust his hands inside, fumbling blindly for the rusty, dirt-covered sword contained within. The search took forever, and he began to wonder why he thought such a sack could ever be a good idea. After too many consecutive grasps at nothing, William turned the bag upside down and poured its contents across the campsite. It was a mess, he realized, and something important might be lost in the shuffle, but it was better than losing his life. The gleam of dull metal caught light as William's hand flashed out to take up the blade. Sword in hand, William plotted his desperate battle plan. He would hack at the ground, loosening the soil, and hopefully give him enough earth to douse the fire. With no light, the bandits might not find the campsite. Even if they did, they'd have to make do with the same darkness he would. Either way, it'd make hiding easier, maybe give him more time to think. The blade danced and jabbed at the ground, throwing up dirt clods and dust, which rained down on the fire in a darkening cloud. Blackness settled over the clearing, heightening William's awareness of the coming interlopers. He could identify at least 5 distinct voices, perhaps more. Gauging distance proved more difficult, and without a reliable guess as to how far off the bandits were, He had no way to know how much time remained to find a spot to lay his ambush. His eyes darted across the blackness. There was a dark patch to the south, or north, maybe west, hard to tell with no point of reference. To the right a few degrees, he spotted a darker patch, but smaller. Behind him, a large dark patch that could have been a path or a bush or a large tree trunk or possibly a mob of brigands. Already he could recognize the glaring flaw in step one of his grand strategy. Half a moment later, he realized flaw two. William knew a great deal about swords, their craft, their properties, how form determined function. What he did not know, unfortunately, was how to wield one in any sort of combat capacity. Any attempt to take on one highwayman, let alone 5 or more, would result in the very sudden demise of his certain boy with no business off his farm. Knowing his luck, the bad leg would catch some of the bottomless bag's debris, sending him sprawling to the ground, with the very probable chance of landing on his own steel. Flaw 3. Random bric-a-brac scattered throughout the camp pushed movement on his bad leg from unpleasant to downright dangerous. A general he was not. Stupid plan, stupid dark, stupid leg, stupid bandit, stupid kobold, stupid adventure. If he were at home, he'd do something intelligent, like run and hide, not lurk in ambush. Hide, tail between legs, cowering, with no intentions of coming out until danger put its ugly head away. That was a plan he could get behind, and William knew just the place, a hiding spot no reasonable person would ever check for a person. There was a chance, he realized, he could get stuck, unable to escape from his secret sanctuary, but at least they wouldn't discover him. Hearing the bandits draw closer, William decided it was a risk he could live with. Maybe Ollivander would show up, chase off the brigands, and help him out. Stranger things had happened. William felt around in the dirt for the rope he'd cast aside. Then he made his way toward the bottomless bag. You know what? Let's go ahead and do a second chapter. That was only 10 minutes. Chapter 8. Separate Ways. It was late when Ollivander made his way back to camp. How late, he couldn't tell. His conversation with Sally had been long. And had been a long and pleasant one. But he did have to wake early in the morning, and he and the boy had several miles to cover before they reached Calyx Landing. And enjoyable as it was talking with Sally Sunshine, as enjoyable as talking with Sally Sunshine might be, I apologize, I didn't sleep well last night. At times, very enjoyable, he thought to himself. Saving Barrows, what's it called, and getting to the bottom of that kobold mess were more important. He tucked the mirror under his arm as he brushed aside the low-hanging branches separating the forest from the clearing, noting the darkness. "What's the matter, William?" he asked, a bellowing laugh rolling out with his words. "Can't sleep with the light on." No reply came. No surprise. The boy looked barely conscious when he returned from the woods, and didn't improve much after dinner. Better to let him sleep. Ollivander felt fairly tired himself, and looked forward to following William off to sweet slumber. His eyes barely open, he shuffled across the camp toward his bedroll. His feet kept tripping over this and that. William had stuffed into that bottomless bag of his any scrap that might be even remotely valuable. Now it seemed he must have filled it so full that his would-be loot spilled out and littered the campsite. Ollivander whistled. It took a lot of packing to fill one of those bags, and the type of person who would pack it that full wouldn't leave it lying around open for their carefully hoarded treasures to tumble out everywhere. Something was wrong. Ollivander blinked several times and squinted, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. No bedrolls and no boy. He scanned the area, following the footprints in the dust. There had been a scuffle of some kind, highwaymen perhaps, 5 of them based on the differences in boot sizes and shape. The clearing looked ransacked, but given the normal strides between footprints, it didn't appear as though they were in any kind of a hurry. Probably no struggle, no blood either, which meant William wasn't killed in his sleep. Likewise, he couldn't see any signs that any bodies had been dragged away. The boy yet lived. Ollivander examined a pattern of prints around camp, which he presumed belonged to William, one booted foot paired with an oversized dot. That could be one good leg and a crutch. Its tracks followed the other out of camp, meaning he had probably been taken captive, and more than likely he'd been sold into illegal slavery, albeit at less a price than a boy of his age would normally fetch. Injured stock tended to drop the value of a commodity. Perhaps if he could trail them back to town, he could free him before a buyer with very little coin to his name snatched up a deal. Better still, at this hour the boy's captors could still be at their secret hideaway, waiting until it was safe to move again. Ollivander determined this a not unreasonable assumption. After all, William was hardly the most mobile. He would slow them down with his twisted ankle and uneven ground, and the tracks proved they hadn't carried him. Their hands, no doubt, were full of loot. He seethed at the thought of these ruffians and lowlives making a prisoner of this boy he'd sworn to aid and protect, and running off with all of his traveling equipment to boot. No bottomless bag, no twin bag, no wineskin, no ward. Nothing but the mirror to help him track down and rescue an injured boy from what would almost certainly turn out to be a whole den full of bloodthirsty, heavily armed thieves. He shrugged to no one in particular. "I have faced worse." Ollivander pulled out the mirror and called for Sally, asking her to leave something in the twin bag, something to let William know he was coming for him, but which wouldn't tip off his jailers. He set his eyes back to the ground and examined the footprints once more. The boy's tracks kept a steady, medium-length stride, no odd drags or scrapes in the dust. William walked freely, legs unbound, otherwise the distance between the steps would have been shorter, perhaps with a chain trail scraping the dirt between foot and crutch prints. Chaining the legs of an injured man would be pointless besides. Restraints of that nature were meant to slow a captive down, and William's legs slowed him enough already. His hands probably weren't bound either, or else the crutch marks would be more erratic. The bandits had only threats to keep him in line, which would make rescue a touch easier. The crutch prints formed a path around the camp in a methodical pattern. No sign of struggle or hurry. The bandits must have surprised William, caught him sleeping, Ollivander determined. No doubt they led him around the camp, forcing him to identify anything of value. The path then led back into the woods to the west, with bandits both in front of and behind. Rescue a target that's surrounded, wounded, and outnumbered, just like the good old days. Ollivander smiled and followed the trail into the blackness of the forest. In spite of the shadows and leafy canopy blocking out all light, Ollivander had no difficulty tracing the bandits' path through the forest. The man in back of the bandits' line had a boot size similar to the barkeep's own, and an even pace besides. The old adventurer made simple work of stepping into a boot print and feeling out the angle and speed to determine where the next foot fell. He would then move blindly from footprint to footprint, each time feeling out where to step next. He found the process to be simplicity itself, and wondered why so few others used his method for tracking without sight. Doubt, he determined. I guess people don't want to try something if there's the slightest chance they'll fail. Ollivander, being a veteran of countless dungeons, wars, and other impossible situations, had long since learned that, all things being equal, the craziest solution was often the best. Guards were trained to spot thieves and fight warriors, but who ever heard of gatekeepers being trained to combat 200 rabid chickens? When encountering a door made of solid iron, most people would attempt some ill-conceived outright assault. The majority of the rest would attempt to pick the lock. Only a clever few will focus on hinges or the weaker wall surrounding the door. And Ollivander had never, not once, come across anyone who suspected an adorable lost puppy to have a time-delayed fireball spell cast upon it. Granted, he wasn't particularly proud of the tactic, but he couldn't argue with the results. To be an expert adventurer was to be a master of the absurd. The trail wound its way west and ended abruptly at the river. The silvery moonlight cast its rays down to the shore where Ollivander eyed the mud and sand. Something had carved a notch in the muck facing northeast, no doubt the keel of a rowboat. He found a scattering of footprints, one set crutched surrounding the area where the boat had been confirming his suspicions. Good, he thought. They took him with him. He bent down and leaned in toward the keel markings, tracing his fingers along its ridges, splashing water over them to measure erosion. The impression in the mud was wider at the base, more rounded on the northwestern face, meaning the slide had been made first, and the southern side, meaning that side had been made first, and the southern side carved upon their exit. They had come from upriver and continued down. The soft edge of the southern ridge indicated they'd left an hour ago. The northern face's smoother contours showed they'd arrived an hour before that, probably foraging for food before slipping off downstream. Finding his camp had simply been an unfortunate coincidence. These were no highwaymen. These bandits were river rats, or worse. The keel indicated a small boat, unsailed. Telltale marks marred the riverbed where several oars had gashed the mud, and oars weren't practical for any sort of regular or long-term river travel. No, the rowboat probably belonged to a larger ship, and that meant pirates. Had it just been the rowboat he followed, maybe Ollivander could have caught up to them. As with everything else about him, his swimming skills were the stuff of legend. Unfortunately, his quarry headed downstream in calm waters with favorable winds. The lead they had was insurmountable, even for him. He would have to continue his trek to Collett's Landing, catch a ferry north, and disembark at Freeport just beyond the gate to the Sixth Realm. As far as harbors went, Freeport was unfriendly and unreliable. Even a savvy captain was as likely to be outright robbed as sell his wares. Only fools and scoundrels stopped at Freeport when the situation didn't absolutely demand it. The whole city bore a much-deserved reputation as a den of vice and villainy. The citizens of its riverside cesspit permitted anything except questions. Small wonder, then, that so many pirates made their home there. Wherever this particular band of river rats took William, it was only a matter of time before they stopped at Freeport. "Better get moving, then," Ollivander muttered to himself as he rose to his feet. Guided by instinct more than sight, he fought his way through the obsidian blackness of the forest back to camp. Quickly packing up what the pirates had left, he stopped back on Plowman's Path and headed south. He would walk unceasingly through the night until he reached Collett's Landing by dawn's first light. Just as well they'd taken the bedrolls. There'd be no time for sleep on the ferry. He had a boy to find. All right. I hope you enjoyed this little adventure of hiding and seeking and piracy, and William's continued cunning ruses to avoid getting killed. We'll pick up next time, and we'll see where William finds himself then. All right. Take care. Until next time, have good dreams.